Now, forgive me if this seems a little bit like clickbait, because trust me, I don't want it to be. This isn't exactly a reaction, but rather it's a reaction, in the sense that I'm not reacting to each individual clip and deriving meaning from it in the sense that I want to know what happens in the film, but instead I'm deriving meaning from why I feel so put off by it. I'm going to go through and explain why I think certain things are wrong about this trailer, or at least why I think things feel a bit wrong. There might be a thing where context has influenced my opinion, or where my opinion has influenced context, but honestly, I don't know, and I'll go into details about that afterwards. It also may be my bias after being incredibly disappointed with The Last Jedi. Now, I'm not saying it's a terrible film, you definitely need to see that film yourself and forge your own opinion, but maybe that's what's causing it. However, something about this trailer just feels unsettling. I guess you could say I have a bad feeling about this.
I wouldn't consider myself a massive Star Wars fan, as I've dedicated most of my time to the Transformers and anime fandoms. I mean, for God's sake, just take a look at my uploads. However, I have been with the franchise since I was a child. I began with the original trilogy, unfortunately the edited versions, not the despecialized editions because they didn't bloody exist. Moved on to the prequels, watched the out-of-order airing of the Clone Wars on television, played the hell out of Force Unleashed on the DS, putting over 200 hours because it was the only console and the only game worth playing that I had for a while, and as an adult I was even more excited for The Force Awakens than I was for any Transformers films coming out. What I mean to say is, even though I don't consider myself an intense fan, I do thoroughly enjoy it. Just not to the point where I can't criticize what's wrong. When the franchise has missteps, I am perfectly willing to call out whatever is bullshit. As such, I've noticed a downward spiral of the Star Wars films. Force Awakens was fantastic for what it was. Whilst it followed the typical J.J. Abrams mystery box form of storytelling, his words not mine.
The thing is that it represents infinite possibility. It represents hope. It represents potential. And what I love about this box, and what I realized I sort of do in whatever it is that I do, is I find myself drawn to infinite possibility and that sense of potential. And I realize that mystery is the catalyst for imagination. Now, it's not the most groundbreaking idea, but when I started to think that maybe there are times when mystery is more important than knowledge, I started getting interested in this.
It's probably one of the best Star Wars films we've gotten. No joke. It ditches most of the cheesy dialogue of the prequels and creates a nice balance of modern cinema conventions and classic sci-fi nonsense. I honestly felt more of a connection with these new characters than I did with any of the old ones. They're far more layered than what we got in the original trilogy, outside of Han and Vader. Don't get me wrong, this is only a marginal difference, but it's my honest opinion. Fight me as much as you like over it, but it's not going to change. Rather, it's going to change my relationship with certain friends who absolutely despised Abrams' attempt. Rogue One was fine for me.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
In typical Gareth Edwards fashion, the overall story hits home, but the characters felt bland and uninteresting. Anyone who was expecting anything else clearly hasn't been paying attention to his Godzilla film. K2SO is by far the best droid in the whole Star Wars universe, aside from possibly Bones, and that ending was perfect for what the film was trying to be. However, the problems that stem from Rogue One aren't the same problems that affect the Han Solo movie, or rather, the problems that affect it hadn't really taken hold at that point. Many would argue that they had, however I disagree. Don't worry, this will all make sense in a moment. Last Jedi is where things took a turn for the worse. Never have I seen a film where you can separate the scenes into two equal halves, where one half is great and one half is terrible. I should reiterate, because some people probably haven't read the opening text, this will feature spoilers for The Last Jedi, or at least minor spoilers. Trust me, I consider it a bad film, but it's a film where no opinion is truly correct, and it's important to forge your own stance. I would recommend that everyone goes see it at least once, maybe twice, just to get a feel of what it is. Everything that involved Rey, Kylo, Luke, and Snoke had me on the edge of my seat, but everything that involves Finn, Rose, and Leia was kind of garbage. The characters themselves are pretty good, and I'd love to see Rose get to shine in a better movie, but the entire mess of a subplot with the casino and the codebreaker felt entirely useless. And how the hell do you waste Benicio del Toro? What the actual f***? Now technically the subplot wasn't useless, however it feels like instead of writing a scene naturally, they created a set piece and shoved it into the story, and then wrote plot threads around it to justify its existence. This is a similar problem that I had with the original trilogy, however not to the same extent. The race scene was straight out of the prequels, and I mean that in the sense that it is the most ridiculous action set piece without any tension or stakes. Simply put, it was dumb, and Star Wars is supposed to be dumb, but not that bloody dumb. However, like I said, half the film is really good. It's a shame it concludes on such a bad note, because that in the end is what soured the experience for me. However, for some, the film is still a fun time. I've even had people say it gets better with each watching, simply because the differences were so off-putting. I'm fine with difference, as it sets films apart. For me though, what ruined it was the sheer stupidity, not the difference. Which brings me to the Han Solo movie, the compilation of all the flaws Disney has injected into Star Wars' festering tumour. Okay, I don't mean it's actually that bad, but all the issues up until this point have finally culminated into this mess of a trailer, and then some. Force Awakens was fine, so that gets a pass. It doesn't really have much responsibility in all of this. Rogue One, on the other hand, is a film that only existed to fill a plot hole. It is a sentence that I stole from the same friend who will be pissed at me for liking both Force Awakens and Rogue One. But even so, this plot hole filling is on a lesser scale of what's happening here. Much of Star Wars' storytelling philosophy relies on illusion, creating depth not in what we see, but in what we don't. It's not as bad as the Death Star because it's an inanimate object that can't possibly have any character depth without being turned into one of those anime girls like Earth-chan. And now I've just given this video cancer. By giving a backstory to the plans, it is somewhat removing the mystery behind its construction, but it does so in a tasteful way that doesn't reduce it into some bumbling nerd technobabble. Ooh, I realised I just knocked the table in the process of reading that line. Everything that happens feels believable within the own universe's logic. This is what I mean when I say Rogue One doesn't display the signs as early as one would expect. Many grabbed onto this issue with the edge of their pitchforks and arguments hating on Rogue One, however I feel it's going to be much more pronounced here. The whole concept of Han Solo is sort of a special effect. However, if done well, it could work out, which from this trailer sadly doesn't seem the case. Han Solo is essentially the Jaws shark. He's imposing not because of what we know about his backstory, but because of what we don't. Hardly anything about his past is in clear view, and to strip it bare in a feature-length film would be doing him a disservice. It can be done well, but from what I'm seeing here it doesn't seem to work. What I'm going to complain about is how they've basically created a generic story and used the Han Solo name to cash in, essentially invalidating the character. Remember Blade Runner 2049? That film shows how to properly evolve a character in a similar way. In fact, I'd say Deckard is Solo done way better. The age evolution is done nearly identically, but in the end it's much more pronounced. What we're given here is just something bland and uninteresting. Which brings me to my next point, the tonal clashes. This problem is a little bit more to pin down without context, because it could either be the case of context affecting the viewing experience, or the viewing experience being put into context, if that makes any sense. The train wreck of this film's shooting has been well known for a while now, and the reason for kicking off Phil and Chris can be interpreted as diverging too far from the established Star Wars canon, and to an extent the Star Wars style. It's not entirely confirmed, and it likely never will be, but that's how I'm going to take it, so let's roll with it, okay? The switch in directors essentially opens up Pandora's box, with oh so many problems. For starters, tone issues. The whole trailer has a Guardians of the Galaxy style feel, which is fine because Hollywood isn't exactly the suppository of all good ideas, and imitation can be the most sincere form of flattery. The problem is that the directing style does not fit with that. The deal is that tonally, the Star Wars gritty outlook doesn't match up with the crazy and wacky style of Lord and Miller. They usually go for vibrant colours to match their chaotic and comedic tone, and it works. This just doesn't. The colour creates a tone, but here the two styles don't mix. At least the boring flat Marvel tones allow for a director to project a style over the top of it. Here it just feels like soaked a nice piece of fairy bread with bitter black coffee. It could work well, but I'm willing to bet it won't. The scenes themselves display the exact same problem. You've got amazing dynamic character shots thrown in with general Star Wars space battles. Between the colour palette clash and the scene clash, this ends up looking like a fan film. A very high budget fan film, but a fan film nonetheless. And that's what I, along with many people, are concerned about. This is where the Last Jedi influence comes in, because at this point Star Wars has become a style rather than a vehicle. When you update something for a modern audience, you need to make changes to fit the new style. Sometimes this change is minimal, and this is something Disney is great at. Others, you create a new story. You need to throw out all the accepted franchise conventions in favour of creating something new, and that's what this film sorely needed. Disney is too focused on recreating that oh so marketable nostalgic that they are shooting themselves in the foot, stopping development in their tracks, and it's something that too many franchises have fallen victim to. Remember Spectre? No, not that one, the James Bond movie. After the amazing Skyfall, the franchise took a step backwards and tried too hard to adhere to the old Bond conventions, and the film suffered greatly for it. It slowly fell into a tonal mess, and from this trailer, that's what this feels like. This is the Last Jedi problem, where Star Wars is no longer a vehicle and instead a design philosophy. And that's another thing I took from that same friend. There are so many diverse stories that can be told in the Star Wars universe, and they're all so different. Disney just happens to be refusing to let any of them shine. At least The Last Jedi wanted to do something different. This just doesn't feel like that. The question is though, is this all derived because I happen to have read more about the behind the scenes drama? Or do the issues in this trailer make more sense because I know the inner machinations? Perhaps it's a bit of both, but it definitely has me worried. The final thing is definitely a Rogue One problem, with the painfully fake feel. See, Chris and Phil have this habit of making films that seem cliched on paper, but then they end up playing with the conventions and doing something new with them. Without them and their expertise, it's very difficult to capture that. Almost every line in this trailer sounds like a quip, and if that is indicative of the movie, then we aren't in for something very good. This is the main problem that plagued Rogue One. None of the characters aside from the robot, ironically, felt like real characters. I get that basically every single Hollywood trailer is designed around the same template of action scenes, quips and movie timing, but this feels excessive, it feels fake. Once again, it's a context and an effect thing, but if you see a cliched story and give it to directors who turn the cliches on their head, then remove said directors, what exactly do you have? And yes, Star Wars is about as cliched as you can get, and at the time period that was all you needed. Many sci-fi tropes owe themselves directly to Star Wars, which in turn owes itself to Flash Gordon, and that's fine, but there's a fine line between celebrating cliches and outright lazily stealing them. That's probably one of the main problems here, amongst other things. Now, I'm not saying this director can't do well, but this film has immense odds stacked against him, and I'm going in with incredibly low expectations.
Thanks for tuning in for 2,580 words of Dr. Lockdown ranting towards the camera about something that is simply a trailer, and I must reiterate that this is just a trailer. Wait, I've never actually mentioned that in the video before, I think it's not in the script, but I'll mention it now. This is just a trailer, and I am probably deriving a little bit too much meaning from this. But that's the problem. It's just so off-putting, and it's an uphill battle for this film from now on. Yes, it might be The Last Jedi's disappointment. Yes, it may be the context of the behind-the-scenes drama. But even then, if this trailer had looked great, I would have been happy, and honestly, I want this film to do well. I don't want films to fail, I want them to succeed. If I am wrong, I will be very happy, and I will make a video, or I'll try to make a video rectifying that mistake, like I need to with Time's Return and Combiner Wars. But that's not the point here. The point is, this is just a trailer, and the film could be amazing. It could also be terrible, and I don't want it to be terrible, but from the evidence that I'm seeing in this trailer, and the evidence from behind the scenes, and a lot of other details here and there, it's not shaping up to be that good. Now that said, I am not one of the people who is completely losing faith in Star Wars, because I know many people are. There's always going to be naysayers and people who think that Disney is completely ruining it, and I don't think that's the case. Like I said, I liked Force Awakens, and I less so, but I still liked Rogue One. And Last Jedi was a bit of a misstep thanks to the director. This here is the first time that true studio interference has ruined a film. I honestly think that since J.J. Abrams is coming back for the third film, which I honestly can't remember the name for, the film will be much better. Because J.J. Abrams likes to work with the studios and come to an agreement, whereas sometimes what's needed, especially with this film, is a completely new direction. So, I must reiterate, just a trailer, it could be great, it could be my own bias, I don't know, but from what I'm seeing here, I'm not convinced. If I am wrong, I will be very happy. But until then, well, I'm probably not going to see it unless it gets great reviews. I am not falling for the same mistake twice. I was dragged along to Last Jedi twice, and I'm not falling for it again. Also, Suicide Squad, I checked that out even though it got terrible reviews and I hated it, so I'm not going to a film that looks like a dumpster fire again. I've learned my lesson. Except with the Transformers film, because I'm a blind fanboy, but you already know that already. And even then, this isn't the be-all end-all film, because Disney is cranking out 1 million Star Wars films a year at a time, so just relax. There will be more Star Wars films. Yes, they may run it into the ground, but there's bound to be a few gems in there somewhere. And even then, this film's gonna make a lot of money, which is great because, hell, toys aren't selling that well.